This is the Music Halls of Fame podcast. This week we honor the year in music for 1988 along with a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame class of 1988. We also make the case for you to vote for Iron Maiden to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And our Spotlight Hall of Fame is the ARIA Hall of Fame in Melbourne, Australia. Before we get going with the podcast, like everyone tells you, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you'll know when these podcast episodes drop, which is usually every Thursday. Now, on to this week's episode. The year was 1988. In music, singer Sonny Bono became mayor of Palm Springs, California. Atlantic Records held a concert at Madison Square Garden in New York City to celebrate its anniversary. Motown Records was sold to MCA Records for $61 million. Speaking of selling, Elton John sold memorabilia at an auction. The bands that formed in 1988 were an impressive bunch who all set the musical landscape for the next 5 years or so, in one form or another. That list included 311, Arrested Development, Bare Naked Ladies, Better Than Ezra, the Bloodhound Gang, Boyz II Men, Bonham, the Boo Radleys, Blur, Cannibal Corpse, Carnage, Crash Test Dummies, Cypress Hill, Deftones, DNA, Bella Fleck and the Flecktones, The Future Sound of London, Can, Control, LFO, London Beat, Lush, Massive Attack, Mazzy Star, Milli Vanilli, Mother Love Bone, who of course became Pearl Jam, Mr. Big, Mudhoney, Nine Inch Nails, Onyx, The Orb, Pajama Party, Pennywise, PM Dawn, Quad City DJs, Saigon Kick, Shakespeare Sisters, Slaughter, The Smashing Pumpkins, The Spin Doctors, Soul to Soul, Technotronic, Tin Machine, Tony, The Traveling Wilburys, and Rex and Effects. Phew! Must have been something in the water that year. Groups who either broke up until their inevitable reunion or went on hiatus that year included The Breakfast Club, Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, Loverboy, The Cars, Flotsam Jetsam, The House Martins, Husker Du, The Plasmatics, Morbid, Supertramp, Sly Fox, Twisted Sister, Ultravox, Vanilla Fudge, and Wall of Voodoo. Musical artists who were born in 1988 included Rihanna, Adele, Lizzo, FKA Twigs, Aquafina, Casey Musgraves, Billy Gilman, Mike Posner, Vanessa Hudgens, Tyler Joseph and Josh Dunn of 21 Pilots, Lil Dicky, James Blake, Benny Blanco, Grimes, A$AP Rocky, A$AP Ferg, Jessie J, Teeny Tempa, Shanae Aiko, Big Sean, G-Dragon, Hayley Williams of Paramore, Zoe Kravitz, Ryan Lewis, Kevin McHale, Banks, Alexa Vega, Julianne Hough, Whitman, Dave East, and James Arthur. Musical artists who passed away in 1988 included Roy Orbison and Andy Gibb, Sam Prater of Sam and Dave, singer Brooke Benton, steel guitarist Pete Drake, blues guitarist Roy Buchanan, Robert Calvert of Hawkwind, Tim Davis of the Steve Miller Band, opera singer Dennis Day, entertainer Divine, guitarist Cliff Gallup, Hillel Slovak of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, singer Sylvester, John Kuralewski of Styx, bluesman Memphis Slim, and singers Chet Baker and Nico. According to Billboard magazine, George Michael's Faith was the biggest selling album of 1988, followed by the Dirty Dancing soundtrack, Def Leppard's Hysteria, INXS's Kick, Michael Jackson's Bad, Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction, Debbie Gibson's Out of the Blue, Richard Marx's self-titled album, Tiffany's self-titled album, and Aerosmith's Permanent Vacation. U2 released the documentary and album Rattle and Hum, while other artists who came on the scene in 1988 with debut albums included the Pixies and Morrissey. Singles-wise, George Michael's Faith was the bestseller of the year, followed by INXS's Need You Tonight / Mediate, George Harrison's Got My Mind Set on You, Rick Astley's Never Gonna Give You Up, Guns N' Roses' Sweet Child of Mine, Whitney Houston's So Emotional, Belinda Carlisle's Heaven is a Place on Earth, Tiffany's Could Have Been, Breathe's Hands to Heaven, and Steve Winwood's Roll With It. Other hit songs that have stood the test of time from that year include Taylor Dayne's Tell It to My Heart, The Church's Under the Milky Way, Johnny Hates Jazz's Shattered Dreams, Pebbles' Mercedes Boy, DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince's Parents Just Don't Understand, and Cheap Trick's The Flame. Even actor Patrick Swayze scored a hit with the song She's Like the Wind from the Dirty Dancing soundtrack. 1988 was a good year for hard rock bands Metallica and Van Halen. It was also the year of the hair band, as artists like Def Leppard, Winger, Cinderella, Poison, Kix, and the band who started the hair band media and moved it into the mainstream, Bon Jovi, were really popular in 1988. Whitesnake even had the hit power ballad Is This Love with the music video featuring the late great video vixen Tawny Kitaen. However, 1988 was also the beginning of the end for hair bands as Guns N' Roses came on the scene, which put the first nail in the coffin of the genre. The New Kids on the Block in 1989 started a boy band craze that put another nail into that coffin, and then Nirvana and the rest of the Seattle grunge scene put the final nail in the coffin a couple years later. In country music, there were top albums by Dwight Yoakam, Ricky Van Shelton, Katie Lang, George Strait, Randy Travis, Reba McEntire, Alabama, the Judds, Hank Williams Jr., Johnny Cash, Steve Earle, and Rodney Crowell. Singles-wise, Earl Thomas Conley, Kathy Mattea, the Judds, the McCarters, the Desert Rose Band, George Strait, the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, Sweethearts of the Rodeo, Eddie Rabbitt, Michael Martin Murphey, and Randy Travis all had big hits in 1988. 1988 was the year that hip-hop artists took their creativity and diversity to a whole other level, elevating the genre. Songs like Eric B. and Rakim's Microphone Fiend and Follow the Leader, Big Daddy Kane's Set It Off, Boogie Down Productions' My Philosophy, Public Enemy's Black Steel in the Hour of Chaos and Don't Believe the Hype, NWA's Straight Outta Compton and Fuck the Police, Rob Bass and DJ Easy Rock's It Takes Two, LL Cool J's Going Back to Cali and Jack the Ripper, Slick Rick's Children's Story, Ice-T's Colors, EPMD's You Gots to Chill, Stetsasonics Talking All That Jazz, MC Light's Paper Thin, Biz Marquis, Vapors, and Run DMC's Beats to the Rhyme helped to set the standard for hip-hop. Tone Loc also had the hit Wild Thing that year that crossed over and became a huge smash in the mainstream. The dance charts in 1988 showcased the usual dance remixes of pop, R&B, and hip-hop songs for that year. But while house music and techno had been bubbling in the underground clubs of New York City, Chicago, and Detroit with DJs like Frankie Knuckles and the Belleville Three, it had not yet crossed the pond to Europe and become an international sensation. That all changed when songs like 1988 songs Big Fun and Good Life by the Belleville 3 alum Kevin Saunderson's project Inner City, along with Larry Heard's Can You Feel It and the Jungle Brothers' I'll House You, all hit the British club scene in 1988. After that, the British rave scene picked up on house and techno, slowly helping to create the European EDM culture for the next 20 years until it became a global phenomenon in the 2010s. The other dance craze on the American dance scene in 1988 was freestyle music, whose popularity continued its 1987 explosion with hit songs that year by artists like Stevie B and Sweet Sensation. In Latin music, artists like Julio Iglesias, Juan Gabriel, Frankie Ruiz, Tony Vega, Jose Luis Rodriguez, Emmanuel, Los Bukis, Los Yonix, Bronco, and Willie Gonzalez all had good years. Meanwhile, Linda Ronstadt had a chart-topping Spanish-language album called Canciones de mi Padre. George Michael's Faith won Album of the Year at the Grammy Awards for 1988, while Bobby McFerrin's Don't Worry Be Happy won Record and Song of the Year. That song was from the Cocktail soundtrack. Cocktail, the movie starring Tom Cruise. Tracy Chapman won Best New Artist at the Grammy Awards. In Excess dominated the MTV Video Music Awards with 5 wins, including Video of the Year for Need You Tonight / Mediate. At the American Music Awards, George Michael, Whitney Houston, and Gloria Estefan and Miami Sound Machine were the big winners. The Billboard Music Awards had not come into existence yet. That would not happen until 1990. At the Eurovision Singing Contest, which was held in Dublin, Ireland, Celine Dion, who was representing not the country of Canada where she was born, but Switzerland, won. At the Tony Awards, The Phantom of the Opera won Best Musical, and Anything Goes won Best Revival of a Musical. At the Academy Awards for Music, The Milagro Beanfield War won Best Original Film Score, and Let the River Run by Carly Simon from the movie Working Girl won Best Original Song. The Pulitzer Prize for Music went to William Bolcom for 12 New Etudes for Piano and Gunther Schuller for Concerto for String Quartet and Orchestra. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony was held on January 20th, 1988 at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City. The ceremony itself is known for being about as crazy a ceremony as there ever was, as there were speech interruptions and snide comments between current and former bandmates in the Beach Boys and the Beatles. For instance, Mike Love of the Beach Boys kept interrupting his own bandmates' speeches and was also ranting about anybody and everybody on stage, including Mick Jagger, who was there to induct the Beatles. All of that couldn't even be blamed on the alcohol. That's just how miserable the guy was. Ex-Beatle George Harrison, in the meantime, let a snide comment slip towards Paul McCartney, who wasn't at the ceremony that year. As for the class itself, the Hall scaled back its list of performers inductees from 15 to 5 for the first time since it started inducting artists back in 1986. During the ceremony, the Hall inducted Motown Records executive Berry Gordy Jr. into the non-performers category. Woody Guthrie and Leadbelly were inducted into the early influencers category, and in the performers category, the Hall inducted the Beatles, the Drifters, the Supremes, the Beach Boys, and this next artist. Robert Zimmerman grew up in Minnesota. From an early age, he was, like most kids, interested in music, so he picked up a guitar. His initial inspiration was Chuck Berry. At a high school gig, Zimmerman was so loud that the principal cut off the microphone. Zimmerman went to college but continued to play, and when he decided to relocate, he went east to New York City. It was there where he found his calling and made his mark, first acoustically and then electrically. He met his biggest idol, Woody Guthrie, played a bunch of clubs, and fell in love with a bunch of performers who would all later become famous. Zimmerman's songs later became poetic legends about social injustice and the Vietnam War. Once he got his recording contract, there was no stopping him. He became a symbol of the American counterculture movement and dragged folk music into the mainstream. He is now an icon with multiple Grammy Awards, a Pulitzer Prize, and even a Nobel Prize for Literature for his songwriting. In fact, he is known as one of the greatest songwriters of all time. But before he was an icon, he made this album. Zimmerman's self-titled debut album did not do well at all. In fact, it only sold 5,000 copies initially. On that album, he only had 2 original songs and did cover songs for the rest of it. On his second album, he wanted to write most of the songs. He had gotten quite political during this time due to his girlfriend, who he had just moved in with. He wrote a lot about war and civil rights for this album. He put power to folk music with words both poetic and biting. He recorded the album in 1 year between April 1962 to April 1963. It was begun in New York City, then London, England for a while before being finished back in New York. It was towards the end of the New York recording sessions that his infamous incident on the Ed Sullivan Show happened when he walked off the stage because the show wouldn't let him perform one of his songs. The album was released on May 27, 1963 and was a hit. It went to number 22 on the Billboard charts and even better overseas. It definitely did much better than his self-titled album, whose name you now know him by, the pride of Duluth, Minnesota, Mr. Bob Dylan. The name of this particular album was The Freewheelin' Bob Dylan, which has the now classic songs Masters of War, A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall, and Blowing in the Wind on it. Bob is also famous for another event, because on July 26, 1965, an event so destructive to the sanctity of life itself took place that is still talked about to this day. Women still cry. Men with long hair still smoke joints before telling the dark, twisted tale of how Bob Dylan went electric at the Newport Folk Festival. Seriously, people, this was a huge deal back then, at least to the folk crowd. I'll explain. See, back in the early to mid-1960s, Bob Dylan was huge. I'm not sure how to describe it in today's terms because there's really no one like him these days. That's probably why he's still so revered. In the 60s, folk music became all the rage. The group The Byrds kind of kicked it all back off into the mainstream when their cover of Dylan's song Mr. Tambourine Man broke through. But by then, it was really Dylan who was considered the king of folk music. That was helped in no small part to his performance at the Newport Folk Festival in 1964. He was introduced then by Ronnie Gilbert of the Weavers, who said, quote, "And here he is, take him, you know him, he's yours," end quote. Folk people apparently took that to heart. To them, Dylan was the Pied Piper. By the 1965 Folk Festival, the crowd that proclaimed him as theirs was ready for their Lord and Savior to return. What his crowd didn't realize was that by then, Dylan was going in a different direction. Only months earlier, he decided not to go with an acoustic sound, and instead, he decided to embrace the electric guitar. He recorded the now classic song Like a Rolling Stone only months earlier and released it only 5 days before his appearance at the festival, so the crowd was not ready for his new sound. So, how would they react? Well, not well. In fact, hate doesn't even begin to describe their reaction. Bob went on stage, plugged in his guitar, and went into an electric version of his acoustic hit Maggie's Farm. The crowd went wild, and by wild I mean they booed, screamed, and said some really not nice things to him. One guy even famously called him Judas, to which Bob famously retorted, "I don't believe you. You're a liar." End quote. Dylan was shocked by the reaction, but his decision was final. He continued playing and recording with the electric guitar and continued with his vision. It's not clear if his crowd ever forgave him for changing his style, but you know what? It really didn't matter. So yeah, kids, Dylan going electric really was a huge deal back then, and he did it at the Newport Folk Festival on July 25th, 1965. After that, Bob released classic albums Highway 61 Revisited and Blonde on Blonde, but then he got into a serious motorcycle accident in 1966, which put him into such a funk that he actually went into seclusion to recover, both mentally and physically. He went back to touring in 1974, became a Christian, and put out more award-winning albums. Bob Dylan was awarded a Nobel Prize for Literature in 2016, the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2012, the National Medal of Arts in 2009, a Pulitzer Prize Special Citation in 2008, the Polar Music Prize in 2000, and the Kennedy Center Honor in 1997. He won the Academy Award for Best Original Song in 2001 for Things Have Changed from the movie Wonder Boys. He's also won 2 Golden Globe Awards, 11 Grammy Awards, including winning Album of the Year in 1998, and 4 Billboard Music Awards. He has 11 songs and albums that were inducted into the Grammy Music Hall of Fame. He was inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame in 1982, the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame in 2002, and was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1988. In short, Bob Dylan is a living legend, who, by the way, is still at it to this day. Presented for induction by Rock and Roll Hall of Fame class of 1999 inductee Mr. Bruce Springsteen, Bob Dylan, inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame class of 1988. Before we get to the rest of the podcast, we'd like to tell you about our other podcast, the Music History Today podcast. Every day we tell you what happened on that date in music history, along with music releases, birthdays, and passings. So, if you like this podcast and want more music history, then please search the Music History Today podcast in audio or video form on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast from. This week, we're going to talk about a group that absolutely deserves your vote for induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Iron Maiden. Despite the fact that most of their songs have never been played on the radio or on television, they're still one of the most successful rock acts in history. The band has released 16 studio albums, 10 live albums, and numerous singles, selling over 100 million records worldwide. They're number 24 on the VH1 100 Greatest Artists of Hard Rock list, and number 4 on the MTV Top 10 Greatest Heavy Metal Bands of All Time list. Influence? Oh yeah, they've influenced plenty. Let's start with Metallica, then slide on over to Slayer, Avenged Sevenfold, Trivium, Slipknot, Fozzy, Opeth, 3 Inches of Blood, Anthrax, and the list goes on and on and on. Besides, how could you not have a band who had the song Bring Your Daughter to the Slaughter into the hall? Iron Maiden has had several members over the years, with the current lineup consisting of lead vocalist Bruce Dickinson, bassist and founding member Steve Harris, guitarist Dave Murray, Adrian Smith, and Yannick Gers, and drummer Nico McBrain. Iron Maiden's music is categorized by the use of twin lead guitars, melodic bass lines, and, of course, Dickinson's powerful and operatic vocals. Their lyrics often focus on history, literature, or mythology, and their album covers are known for featuring that famous band's mascot, Eddie. Good old Eddie. Their live performances are legendary and energetic, with their use of pyrotechnics, elaborate stage setups, and, of course, Dickinson's theatrical stage presence. Plus, Eddie the mascot usually does make an appearance in some form or another. Now, if you want to get your feet wet with them, then start with Best of the Beast. That's their greatest hits album. If you want to deep dive with them, then I would go with Killers, Number of the Beast, Power Slave, Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, and No Prayer for the Dying. But really, all of their albums are good. As much as a lot of people like myself think that they deserve induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, there is one group of people who don't want them to be inducted. That would be the band members themselves, who are already on record as saying that they will never show up for the induction ceremony should they ever actually get inducted, since they've been nominated a bunch of years now. Any way you slice it, though, more heavy metal needs to be in the hall, and they can start by inducting Iron Maiden in, whether Iron Maiden wants to show up or not. And you, yes you, can help vote them in. Voting continues on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's website. You can vote for up to 5 artists per day, every day, right up until sometime towards the end of April when the voting will end. We'll leave a link for the voting in the show notes. The Art Centre Melbourne is a performing arts complex in the Melbourne Arts Precinct in South Bank, which is a suburb of Melbourne in Victoria, Australia. The centre was constructed starting in 1973 and completed in 1984 when it fully opened. The centre has a bunch of theaters and galleries and is noted for having not only the usual highbrow concert and ballets from classical and jazz artists, but for also having roller skating, a circus, and a movie theater. In the complex lies an exhibit for the ARIA Hall of Fame. ARIA, or Australian Recording Industry Association, is the Australian lobbying group for their music industry. They put on the ARIA Music Awards, which is their version of the Grammy Awards. They also induct people into their Music Hall of Fame, simply called the ARIA Hall of Fame, because sometimes, you know what? A simple name is a good name. The inductions started in 1988 and have been going on ever since, except for 2000 when no one was inducted. The number of annual inductees varies. For the last few years, only one act per year has been inducted. In 2006, the Hall of Fame inducted a group called the Divinals. The Divinals were formed in Sydney, Australia in 1980 by lead singer Chrissy Amphlett and guitarist Mark McKentry, who had performed separately in other bands throughout Europe and Australia. The original band lineup was Amphlett on lead vocals, McKentry on guitar, Jeremy Paul on bass, and Richard Harvey on drums. While various other band members came and went from their lineup, Amphlett and McKentry were the two mainstays and the driving forces behind the band. Legend actually has it that music journalist Vince Lovegrove gave the band their name after seeing the word divine in a Bible passage and throwing an S on the end of the word. Combining the word with vinyl just seemed like a natural progression, I guess. Chrissy's onstage costume was usually a school uniform with fishnet stockings to give her the provocative dirty girl look. With a somewhat raspy voice and with the band's controversial sexual lyrics, she quickly became a sex symbol. She also quickly courted controversy. The band was popular in Australia in the 1980s, starting in 1981 with their song Boys in Town, along with hit songs Science Fiction and Good Die Young. That later song title would become ironic later on, as you'll soon see. The band was the opening act at the US Festival in America in 1983, and their 1985 hit Pleasure and Pain was a minor hit in America but a major hit in Australia. Their 1990 hit I Touch Myself created a ton of controversy, and also some radio station bans because the song was about, well, masturbation, and because, well, America. Yeah, no. The band broke up in 1996 after Amphlett and McKentry got into an argument. Christina's problems with drugs and mental health struggles didn't help matters either. They got back together in 2006 and 2007 for a small tour and were thinking about doing a new album. In 2007, though, Amphlett was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis and then was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2010. She passed away from complications from breast cancer in 2013 at the young age of 53 years old. The good truly die young. The band that gave America the hit songs Pleasure and Pain and When I Think About You, I Touch Myself. The Divinyls, inducted into the ARIA Hall of Fame in 2006. And that is it for this episode of the Music Halls of Fame podcast. For more podcast episodes, which drop every Thursday in audio and video form, then please like, subscribe, and click the notification bell on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio Podcasts, CastBox, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts from.